to the philosophical use of the courses. First, in Luther's definition, there is an emphasis on change and development, on movement, that is, as it is in Aristotle's philosophical scheme. However, the body and soul that are not seen in light of their mutual relation, but rather in light of God, namely the efficient cause. That God who opens up his own future for man. As Luther states in his interpretation of the first chapter of St. John's Gospel, and I quote, "He, namely God, is, however, not like a carpenter or architect who, after completing a house, a ship, or the like, turns over the house to the owner of his residence, or the ship to the boatmen or mariners for sailing, and then goes away. Craftsmen are wont to do this after doing a job or finishing a task. They leave without any concern for their work and enterprise, and without any regard for its maintenance. God proceeds differently. God the Father initiated and executed the creation of all things through the Word, and now he continues to preserve his creation through the Word, and that forever and ever. He remains with his handiwork until he sees fit to terminate it. And so the story goes on until eternity. For Luther, as it was for Aristotle, the material cause is instrumental to its formal cause. Matter is passive and suffers from the realization of its form. But an important qualification must be made. Unlike the theological tradition before Luther, the material cause is the human being itself. It is not divided into soul and body, where the soul is the active part, but it retains its composite structure as being completely pura materia. Why, one may ask? Well, one of the reasons may be that Luther has moved the formal cause from an inherent, substantial thing in the human makeup, namely the soul, to God's creative action. The former of man does not reside with the ability to make it conform with faith through the praxis of love, fides caritate formata. It is not an imitatio Christi. Luther locates forma as God's work for the future life. It is faith itself, conformity with the word, as Ebeling points out, which makes up the form of man. However, what Ebeling is rather reluctant to develop is that the mediation of that form is not only communicated as a personal existential persuasion, but it has a strong external dimension, be it the Bible or the sacraments or the church or the preaching. This aspect is at stake in Luther's controversy with Zwingli, and even more in the large disputations of Christ of 1539 and 1540. Against Zwingli, Luther underlines that God is not bound by the law of physics. Christ becomes a corporal reality for the believer in the sacramental practice. Christ, to whom the baptized is conformed, cannot be divided into his spiritual and bodily existence. He cannot be placed far away in heaven and spiritually present to the believers. These both aspects, his spirit and his body, are fundamental to his humanity, and a division would be contrary to the incarnation. Let us now slowly move towards the last part and see how Luther brings bodily man into the core of the Christian vision of the future. If we take one of the crucial ideas of St. Paul in his first letter to the Corinthians, namely the idea that the physical or natural body, the soma psychikon, will be resurrected as a spiritual body, as a soma pneumatikon, Luther offers some far-reaching comments. Animale corpus, a natural body, is the same as the Hebrew nephesh, says Luther. The striking aspect for our discussion pertains to the willingness of Luther to connect the concept of the soul completely to the bodily life of the senses. Nephesh, or anima, is not a part of the human body, it is the whole, he claims. Therefore, this kind of bodily existence, which is presented by the word anima, could be labeled as a cow body, einen viehischen Leib, as he says in German. I don't know how cow body translates into Italian. Okay. Animal, yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. Now, the unity of soul and body is hereby accentuated to the degree that they have become one thing. A similar observation is made in the Genesis lectures, where the Hebrew words for soul, nephesh, and flesh, namely basar, are brought together. Luther observes that nephesh denotes nothing but an animated body or physical life, such as the ox, the sheep, man, etc. Although basar denotes a denser element, it is also given breath and has the pulse from the soul. If the soul indeed is the body, or the body is the soul, the question now arises, what about the spiritual body of St. Paul? For Luther, the main story for St. Paul is to tell the natural body, or the cow body, this. It eats, digests, and gets rid of the remnant. Now it visits the toilet, and is as such corruptible, miserable, and weak. In other words, the body is bound to the earth as the other animals are bound to the earth. In St. Paul's account, however, it is also understood as a seed, a semen, for the spiritual body. When it dies and is buried to the ground, it becomes a body which is not living this life. What does that not living this life mean for Luther then? It is the bodily necessities, such as food and shelter, wife and children, as he says, he's a man, of course, that are not required anymore. The insistence on food and drink as sign of animal life was also underlined in Luther's commentary on the Genesis, when he reflected on the creation of man and the distinction between the species of humans and that of animals. Animal life, Luther says, and I quote, "Animal life has need of food and drink. It has need of sleep and rest. Their bodies are fed in like manner by food and drink, and they grow. And through hunger they become faint and perish. The stomach receives the food, and when the food has been digested, it passes it on to the liver, which produces blood, by which all the limbs are given fresh strength. In this regard, there is no difference between man and beast. And yet Moses gives distinction to the life of man in this manner that he says about him alone that he was made a living soul, not simpliciter, not simply like the other animals, but an eminently living soul, because he was created after the image of God. Although the living soul, the anima viventem, participates in this life of nutrition, this life of growth and decay, man is endowed with the image of God. If we return to Luther's commentary on the resurrection chapter in 1 Corinthians, we can see that there is indeed a continuity between the life on earth and the life in the hereafter, in heaven. The soul will have physical life or flesh and blood. If not, it could not be called a true body, according to Luther. There is a clear difference between the two forms of bodies, however. The physical life of the resurrected body is not connected to the life circle on earth. It is entirely nourished and preserved spiritually by God and has life entirely in him. When Luther tries to express this, he does so in hyperbolic terms, perhaps borrowed from mysticism. And I quote, "And then, when the body thus lives spiritually in God, it will sally forth into heaven and earth, play with sun and moon and all the other creatures, and also be delighted by this. It will be a completely spiritual existence. It will find such content bliss, so satt und selig, in this that it will never think of eating and drinking again. It will be a completely spiritual existence of life, of the whole person, covering both body and soul. It will issue from the Spirit and will come immediately from or through God, so that we will be illumined by him and know him not only with regard to the soul, but our whole body will be pervaded. It will be as clear and as light as the air. It will see and hear sharply to the ends of the world. We will need nothing else for life or preservation of life. And yet, we will have a true body. This is comparable to the stars that are now in the heavens. They are so constituted that they need nothing for their existence, and yet they are physical creatures. To be sure, they have no terrestrial body, but a celestial one. What I find striking in this description by Luther is his emphasis on the sensual aspects of such a celestial life. It will become a feast for the eyes, so to speak, filled with experience, but not connected to the habits of the body's cultivation, which binds the body to the ground. When Luther explained what St. Paul meant by God will be everything to everyone, a similar structure can be observed. Luther mentions the problems of a person that is ill. Sickness prevents people from having the possibility to digest food. Indeed, for Luther, a significant sign of dying is the absence of eating. In the heavenly life, however, we will not look for bread and wine. It will be sufficient only by viewing and looking at God. And I will shorten the citation, just take one sentence. Indeed, I believe that everything will become much more beautiful, water, trees and grass, and that there will be a new earth, as St. Peter says, which will be a delight to behold. Lust, as the German word has it, a desire. Let me come to the end. Again, the emphasis on the aesthetical experience of beauty does not portray a transformative movement away from the senses and up to the soul or a spiritual world. Rather, it intensifies bodily desire through the glorified body. And to conclude, it is the heretics who claim that only the soul or the spirit and not the body will arise. Luther claims. Thank you.
C'è un dibattito adesso. Quindi intanto grazie per questa relazione che aveva riferimento anche sia su quella prima, sulla creazione, anche sulla questione della forma. Siamo un po' in ritardo con il nostro programma, nonostante ciò vorrei dare l'occasione, se qualcuno vuole fare un intervento diciamo importante, o una domanda, dire qualcosa. Prego. Sì, Franco. C'è il microfono.
And I want to say you an explication and something to clear actually. In the last document with Lutheran Church and Catholics, dal conflitto alla comunione, in the effort to unite Catholics and Lutherans, it is said that speaks about Christus in the glory, Cristo glorioso. That is a good tract. What do you think about in the Holy Supper, Christus, the body of Christus glorious? Is something useful to understand actual theology from now. And it's different, I think that it's not too different from Luther, from Corpus Christi. Sì, ho tentato di dire, ecco, per chi non capisce l'inglese, se nell'ultimo documento interessante, dal conflitto alla comunione, nel capitolo in cui si parla della possibilità di un incontro tra cattolici e luterani sulla Santa Cena, problema che è stato, come sappiamo, dirompente anche al tempo della Riforma, la presenza definita in quel documento di Cristo glorioso. Cos'è il Soma Sarkikos? Il Cristo risuscitato, come lo conosciamo, che passa tra i muri, che c'è, che non c'è, che c'è da altre parti. Ecco, volevo dire se questo è vicino a Lutero, forse, ma è utile anche oggi nella discussione ecumenica.
Thank you for your question, which raises a very profound and important issue, not only to the ecumenical discussion, but also to theology as a whole. And perhaps someone could translate afterwards, or is it? Do you understand if I speak in English? Okay, I will try to speak slowly then. I think your question touches upon one of the most important issues in theology and also in the ecumenical discussion. And my impression is that Luther tries to be as realist as he can as a theologian of the incarnation. He tries to be faithful to the real presence of Christ, the bodily presence of Christ in the sacraments. His teaching has been a bit unfortunate, summarized as Consubstantiationslehre. That's I think the attempt by Luther, as I read him, is to say that that Christ is as intimate present in the Holy Supper as God is present in the child in Bethlehem. So you have the word coming to the elements, and it is this intimacy that I think is the key to understand his teaching. Whether the Transubstantiation is a good formulation of that content could be made, but there is, I think, among the Catholic believers, I think they have the same experience of the presence of the incarnated God on the table. So I think that's one of the most important bridges between the two confessions. So but it's a difficult question. But I think the closeness to nature, creation as nature, as God's nature, and that God comes in Christ is not only there in the acoustic words of the preaching, but that He's also there as materia, as bodily presence. That is for me very important, and I think it strikes a nerve by Luther that is perhaps not as important by the later Lutheran theologians.